Payback time! My name is Nick Weston. I'm perfectly ordinary in every way. Well, I guess you could call me a little short and skinny. My unspoken motto all my life has been, don't make waves. My life was quiet, average, and perfect for me. I didn't make a lot of money, but I lived somehow. I had a good job, even if it didn't elicit enthusiastic anecdotes at parties. I dated a few women, had serious relationships with even fewer, and married one. My wife was Kelly, and she was the only one who made me feel special. Don't get me wrong, I didn't have the philosophy, live for yourself and let others live. Far from it. But even I admit, it feels good to win a championship, to earn a trophy. That's how I reacted to marrying Kelly, and after our years together, she still makes me feel like a gold medalist in a relationship. Well, minus a few weeks. Now, I should make one thing clear since I obviously haven't until now, which is why my life has taken such a turn. Just because I'm a firm believer in not looking for trouble doesn't mean I'm malleable. At least that's what I thought. Others apparently thought I was malleable. Why did everyone think differently than me? Yes, I'm not exactly imposing, but still. Truth be told, in my entire life, I've never had to take things to the point of a fight. I just did my best to live my life without causing trouble, and no one ever saw the need to attack me. But I told myself that I wouldn't buckle and tolerate it if I was ever attacked. The particular snake that got into my garden was another employee of my company, Jack Knowles. While I worked in climate control, he worked in the receiving and delivery department. He was everything I wasn't, tall, well-built, ruggedly handsome, I think, and completely self-absorbed. From what little I had managed to learn over the years of us working at the same place, he had once played sports in college or something like that. Those days are gone, but he's worked to maintain his physique as well as his demeanor. According to Jack, his nickname on his previous team was the Mountain. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're the only one who doesn't believe someone's bullshit? It's like you're wearing glasses from strangers among us, only these recognize morons. Everyone in our company, men and women, seem to heed Jack's every word. People laugh at his dumb jokes. Guys gather around to cheer him on as he bragged about his sexual exploits, not being too secretive. He shamelessly flirted with every attractive woman in the office, whether they were married or not. He could also go on long lunches at his whim and finish work early without fear of reprisal from management. Well, you get the idea. Anyway, the whole time I was asking myself how each of these normally intelligent people could have fallen under his spell. God, some of the guys even referred to him as the Mountain on occasion. Sure, that sort of thing was annoying, but I don't want it to seem like I'm obsessing over it. It's just an observation. I kept my cool, did my job, and went home to Kelly. Jack and I never crossed paths on the job, so I kept my mouth shut. Didn't want to make waves after all, so I don't understand why Jack decided to pay attention to me. Maybe he realized he wasn't impressing me enough. Maybe I'm the classic bully-victim relationship. But he targeted me. It started small, little things, like when guys just tease each other, insults about my height and size. There were rare occasions when I needed to go down to the loading dock to get some documentation, and he'd ask if I needed him to get it for me from a desktop or something. His entourage laughed and I chuckled, playing along and letting him know I wasn't paying attention. For some reason, Jack Knowles decided that Nick Weston was his new source of entertainment at work. It wasn't long before I became Little Nicky. Yes, that nickname was applied to me from time to time in my youth. No big deal. But now it was how I was addressed at work, where the adult professionals gathered, sometimes in the presence of superiors. I could practically feel the contempt growing for me in my office, and it was as if I subconsciously knew that judging by what everyone thought of me, I had already seen my last promotion in the company. It doesn't bother me. The guy's just having fun. It's no big deal. Don't make trouble. You're imagining things. Looking back, I realized that my usual tactics actually worked against me. But it was a lifelong learned trait that can't be overcome all at once. Besides, I figured that if I confronted him, he would laugh and clap me on the shoulder, saying he was just kidding. If I was outraged enough to file a complaint, it was unlikely that anything would happen to the golden boy. It's more likely that I would have ended up losing my position when my coworkers turned on me for causing any difficulty. Knowles doesn't mean any harm. He's just cheering everyone up. Don't forget, whether I was deluded or not, I still didn't believe I was a wimp. I was convinced that the threshold beyond which I should begin to take action had not yet been crossed. Perhaps, in retrospect, I myself was partly responsible for the events that were about to happen, creating the conditions in which the seeds were able to take root. This had been going on for months when Jack decided to escalate the situation. I had a package of important papers brought to me from another office. Jack noticed my name on the package as he passed by the mail cart and decided to deliver it himself. "Come on, Nicky! Special delivery!" That was the only warning before the stuffed manila envelope collapsed onto my desk. Twisting, it fell to the floor, knocking over a folding double photo frame. It contained 2 photos, my wedding picture with Kelly, and her posing on the beach in a bikini from our last vacation. Since I was at my desk and Jack had tossed the package halfway to his, he was much quicker to pick up the fallen photo frame. "Hey, Nicky, sorry," Jack said with a snide smirk on his face in a tone of insincerity and condescension. As he straightened up with the photos in his hand, I made the most aggressive gesture toward him that I had ever made up to that point, trying to snatch them from him. Jack ducked easily and turned them around to look at them. He looked my wife over from head to toe with an approving smirk. "Not bad, little Nicky. I can't imagine how you managed to keep her down." Since it was just the 2 of us this time, I sensed much less levity and more genuine contempt in his tone. Likewise, I didn't give him a forced smile. After staring at another man's wife for too long, he carelessly tossed the double frame on the bag and turned toward the door. "Send that filly over to me to be ridden around a bit. Wild as she is, she'll throw you off sooner or later. Hell, I'd do you a favor." He spat over his shoulder nonchalantly. For what seemed like the first time ever, something inside me started to tense up. After that, however, nothing much happened. In fact, the relationship between Jack and me was as quiet as it had been before this whole thing started. Too quiet, I should have thought, but I was satisfied that I had eased the tension and believed that my personal philosophy had weathered the storm, and I could set sail again. Shortly thereafter, the company's annual summer picnic was held. I was just pulling into the parking lot and watched Kelly checking her hair and makeup one last time in the visor mirror. It was one of those little moments when you fall in love with a person all over again. I was sitting there thanking the Almighty, looking at my wife's vision, when she noticed me looking at her dreamily. "What are you thinking about, huh? Should I even know?" she asked. "Just thinking it's time for us to go on another vacation." "Oh, really? That's it?" "Uh-huh," I replied, probably in the back of my mind thinking about that day in my office. Somewhere warm and sunny with a beach, maybe buy you a new bikini, or maybe even go somewhere you won't need it. "Ha-ha, wouldn't you like that?" She playfully patted my arm. "Come on." With those words, she got out of the car and I followed her. My good mood was short-lived. Jack, the mountain. Knowles was fashionably late, but that didn't stop him from gathering a crowd around him. There was a constant group of men around him laughing at whatever nonsense he spouted. I was doing a good job of keeping Kelly and I at a comfortable distance while we ate kebabs and socialized. However, I noticed that my wife was occasionally glancing over at a bunch of people, and she was clearly curious as to what was going on there. My luck was about to run out. Jack, of course, positioned himself next to the drinks, and at some point we had to get refills. I did my best to grab our drinks going in literally back and forth, noting Kelly's definite reluctance to leave the drinks area, and almost breathed freely when he spotted me. "Hey, little Nicky," he shouted, stopping us in our tracks. "Does your mom know you're sneaking a beer?" Immediately, there was an explosion of laughter from our coworkers around us, as well as guests who didn't know either of us until today. I mean, come on. It wasn't even a good joke. "Come on," he said, approaching us so that our size difference became obvious. "I'm going to have to see some ID before I let you take this." Another fit of laughter broke out, but I barely paid attention to it. The reason was that this time another laugh was added to the laughter. My wife's laughter. The crystalline, angelic sound I practically lived for now sounded as harsh as a budding musician trying to play the clarinet. I glanced at her involuntarily. I wasn't the only one who had picked up on that sound, and while I'm sure he'd been looking at the modest neckline of her summer dress more than I had up to that point, Jack had masterfully pretended to notice Kelly for the first time. Well, hi. I know you. You're that beautiful woman with great taste in swimsuits. He flashed her a crooked grin. Excuse me? She replied. Her tone betrayed her surprise at his impertinence, but there was suspiciously no anger in it. In fact, a hint of a smile played on her lips. There was a prickling in my heart. Yeah, Nikki likes to brag about you to the guys, showing everyone pictures of your awesome figure. I got to say that picture doesn't flatter you. Oh, really? There was anger in her voice now, but it wasn't directed at Jack. Her irritation at his little harmless lie was nothing compared to the storm that was now raging inside me. I confess I was more than annoyed that she seemed to immediately believe the lies of a man she'd never met, especially since it was 180 degrees at odds with what I was doing. Indeed, all the people here knew that unless they had personally sat at my desk, they had not seen this picture, but not a soul told him he was talking nonsense, and if I started to deny it, it would look fake, whiny, and self-serving. I was trapped. But the main focus of my rage was still Jack Knowles. My face instantly flushed with rage and humiliation in a way that felt like I was burned after 6 hours in the sun. That asshole couldn't count all his fingers and toes without a calculator, yet he easily manipulated everyone around him, including my wife and, by extension, myself. I was still wearing those glasses. Why can't anyone but me see him for what he is? Now his eyes were fixed on her. He was staring at Kelly, and not imperceptibly. His body language said I wasn't there, but his words were meant for both of us. I'd like to take you out sometime. That is if you can ever be relieved of your babysitting duties. There was laughter again, though more awkward and disjointed. After all, my co-workers had some modicum of decorum. My wife, for her part, covered her mouth in shock, but her cheeks betrayed a smirk, and her eyes glittered. I'd seen it. Damn women. They never miss an opportunity to convince you of their superior perception and that they know men by heart, but that apparent wealth of understanding seems to fail them when they need it most. Woe should have been dressed as a used car salesman, so fake was he. At that point, I thought I didn't stand a chance. I certainly had no support, especially where I needed it most. Suddenly losing the urge to drink, eat, or celebrate, I gave up my beer and headed for the exit. As I started to move, I took Kelly's hand in mine. For the briefest moment, she resisted the force pulling her before some part of her brain turned on, and she followed me. Perhaps she just wasn't expecting the sudden withdrawal, but I took her resistance as another mini-betrayal and swept her hand away like a hot potato before her legs even started moving. I moved with determined but unhurried steps, vaguely sensing Kelly making the typical excuses to the crowd before following me. Jack didn't fail to call out, "Hey, come on, Nikki. I was just kidding. Don't be a jerk. God knows I'd never want to cross you." This caused more laughter, including Kelly's laughter, the beginning of which I heard start before she stopped. She just couldn't help herself. It occurred to me for a moment that for once in his life, Jack might have wondered if he'd gone too far. But no, that would require self-criticism, which he didn't possess. Even if by some miracle he had, his pride would have demanded that he stay true to himself to save face. I moved some distance away and sat down on the picnic bench, staring into the void. Kelly stood right behind me, watching the drama playing out on my face. I could feel several emotions bubbling up inside her, alternately taking center stage in her thoughts. Resentment, toward me. Embarrassment, not at me, but because of me. Confusion, what exactly is she supposed to tell me? Even perhaps disappointment, disapproval, disrespect. How did he set me up so quickly and thoroughly in front of my own wife, and how did she pay no attention to it? Finally, she spoke up. Was this demonstration really necessary? I looked at her incredulously. I mean, your friend embarrassed you, and yes, he was rude, but he was just messing around. It was obvious. He probably does that a lot. I slowly stood up and looked her in the face. My, friend? Well, it doesn't matter, I don't know. She decided to change tactics. Hey, if you don't want guys hitting on your wife, maybe you shouldn't show off the goods to your co-workers. I could only bow my head slightly with my eyes closed and shake it a few times in frustration. Kelly completely misunderstood my body language. Look, Why don't we go deal with this? I'm sure we can all get together, exchange apologies, and realize it was just a simple misunderstanding. She said this while pointing over her shoulder to where we were coming from. I thought for a moment before replying, "No, thank you. I understood perfectly well, and my day was ruined anyway." I turned around and headed for the car. As I reached it, I realized that I had come all this way alone. I looked back and saw her in the distance by the drinks table. I pondered for a moment, risking chewing off my tongue as my vision turned red, then got in the car and started it up to turn on the air conditioning. I sat for a while, studying the details of the manufacturer's emblem on the steering wheel while the interior cooled down, even if my anger didn't. Finally, I said to myself, "Screw it," and put it in reverse gear. No sooner had I started driving than I heard a knock on the passenger window. There stood Kelly, showing me the "what the hell" gesture. I put the car back in park, the doors unlocked, and my wife climbed inside in a fit of irritation. "What, your problem?" "I only came over to offer our apologies, and Mr. Knowles was kind enough to apologize, too," she said. "Apologize? For what? The guy's a world-class asshole. There was a lot going on today, but when it comes to him, there was nothing atypical." "Wait, Mr. Knowles?" Kelly was taken aback for a moment because I never, ever, say that. That should have been a red flag to her, but she brushed it off because the 5 minutes she'd spent with him told her something else. Then she blushed briefly at what her new acquaintance had been called. But then, in a subconscious attempt to stay on top of things, she felt angry again. "Great! I was trying to do the right thing, but you decided to lash out at me. I can't believe you're acting like this. I had no idea you'd be such a baby. I'm really going to have to babysit you, aren't I?" I have no idea what was on my face, but whatever it was, it knocked the wind out of her sails. She turned away but didn't apologize, apparently believing that I was the one who should be apologizing. The ride home passed in silence. I was thoughtful, of course, and I assumed she was too, but the only time I risked a glance in her direction was when I saw the faint reflection of her face in the window. It was faded, but there was a smile on her face. Was she daydreaming? We didn't say a word to each other that night, and things were cool between us after that. There were the usual conversations we had together, small talk, discussing mundane things, not the slightest hint of intimacy. I sullenly reflected on how quickly what we had with her had evaporated. After that fateful picnic, the lousy mood had calmed down, but it never went away. As much as I didn't deserve Jack Knowles coming into my life, I didn't deserve my life partner taking his side. The next business day after the picnic, Jack made an effort to publicly accept my apology, which I never did. I barely caught the thinly veiled sneer, but now for a different reason. I was no longer loose. I had encased myself in stone. For the first time in my life, I was not adrift. Now there was resentment sitting in me. His comment was just thrown into the general pile. You could say I was having a crisis of faith of sorts. For the first time in my life, my ingrained, lifelong defense mechanism was failing me. I had a hard time dealing with it, which is understandable. The more I thought about my wife, the worse the taste in my mouth became. A man is supposed to come to his senses and apologize after a few days, but I had nothing to apologize for, and earning Kelly's forgiveness was not an option. In fact, even getting an apology from her was no fun. I realized that I didn't care. I began to analyze every single thing she did from a new perspective. Had she always had these little bad habits? Had I just not noticed them? Was I suppressing the little annoyances out of love? Admittedly, there were some minor annoyances among the new questions. Things I had undoubtedly known before, but now felt. I realized that her taste in music actually sucked. I thought about how her car was a pigsty. There must have been at least 10 empty disposable coffee cups in her passenger seat. Why do I feel like I'm discovering all this just now? And why does it bother me so suddenly? However, it was all just a response to how she felt about me. I'm willing to bet money that she thought she was skillfully hiding it. But right now, I was watching her. For the first time, to be honest. I was noticing the subtle things. Tiny grimaces at the sight of my habits that she'd discovered she didn't like. I could feel her contempt for me. Pity, even. Hell, apologizing for something I'd done nothing wrong would probably make it worse. We'd fallen out of love without even fighting. Strangely, I wasn't even sure it bothered me that much. That thought tormented me more than the thought that I might lose her. Before all of this, I would have sworn that Kelly was out of my league and I would never have anyone better than her again. Now I was looking at this beautiful woman, and the only thing on my mind was betrayal. Weeks passed, and there was a lull on the front again. I didn't hear a peep from Jack at work, but I noticed his wolfish grin when he thought I couldn't see. My newfound attention was also focused on work. No one talked to me in the office unless it was work-related. I could feel their discomfort around me, felt their pitying looks. I was beginning to hate them all. My boss was shifting difficult tasks to me and thought he was doing it subtly enough that I didn't notice. I thought it was all rumors from my humiliation at the picnic, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. There was a lot more to those looks being thrown at me, as I soon found out. The final death of my former life came in the men's restroom of my company's main lobby. I didn't normally use this place, but I had become so withdrawn, resentful, and embittered about everything. I contemplated how it was all eating me up from the inside out as I looked at the prepared lunch on my desk. To hell with it, I thought. I need to treat myself. I hadn't done that in a very long time. I figured if Jack could indulge in long lunches, so could I. My boss could get behind it. I tossed my lunch in the trash and headed for the main entrance, thinking about the fact that there was an upscale steakhouse downtown. On the way, I felt the need to pee, so I stopped by the restroom. Although I just needed to pee, the mood was such that I went into the last stall. I had just finished and was about to reach out to flush when two guys approached the urinals. They weren't exactly quiet, but obviously thought they were alone. I recognized them by their voices, but I didn't know which one was which. Mike and Gavin. Both worked with Knowles at the loading dock and were a couple of lackeys. Seriously, we never grow up, do we? "Hey, you sure you want wings? We've got time to go get a steak," said a guy whose name I think was Gavin. Damned if they didn't have the same idea as me. "Not until after payday. My wife will skin me," Mike apparently replied. Gavin laughed briefly. Mike felt the need to clarify that statement. "Hey, we can't all be Jacks." "No shit like that. I still can't believe he's sleeping with Nikki's wife." "What did he say?" "You really think so? That's ballsy, even for him?" "Oh yeah, he is," Gavin said. "Ever since right after the barbecue. He practically picked her up there. He told me he'd nail her by next week. They're meeting for lunch. He's probably sleeping with her in the dude's bed as we speak." "Do you think little Nikki knows?" Mike asked. "Who knows, man? Who gives a shit? And what would he do about it? Jack's gonna beat him to death while he's pissing his pants." "Dude, maybe I'll do it." "Yeah? Or maybe I'll tell your missus you said that, and then she'll give me a line." "You want that dried-up old broad? Oh, please." They laughed, flushed. The bastards at least washed their hands, even though it meant I had to stand awkwardly in the last stall for another 30 seconds. They still hadn't noticed me. Well, how could they? I know. Weird for my first thought. It was at that moment that I learned that it was possible to be shocked without being surprised. Unlike the guy who was here a moment ago, I didn't have the slightest doubt that what I heard was true. It made so many pieces fall into place in my mind. But that doesn't mean that hearing it out loud didn't hit like a ton of bricks. The looks my coworkers were throwing at me made even more sense now. I finished my business on autopilot, not even paying attention to my reflection in the mirror as I washed my face. The only thought in my head was that I no longer had an appetite, and when my car pulled out of the parking lot, I wasn't going downtown. If I'd had any doubts before I pulled up to the house, they were dispelled when I saw Kelly's car parked out front, and an SUV that I could only assume belonged to Knowles. Hell, they're not even trying to hide it. The neighbors are just as aware of what's going on as my coworkers, I thought dejectedly. It's still weird for me to remember this. I should have felt grief-stricken in all of this. Maybe I did, but the blue color of heartache was completely washed out by the red anger of betrayal. My anger was a red-hot coal in the pit of my stomach. As I approached the front door, it occurred to me that I wasn't the least bit afraid of Jack the Mountain. At that moment, all my cognitive faculties were preoccupied with retribution. I had heard the expression, red veil, before. Now I knew exactly what it meant. It was as if a red light filter of hate had been put on my vision. They could be heard through the door, but as soon as I opened it, the sound of raucous love was unmistakable. There was a short walk down the carpeted walkways to visually confirm the reality of my marriage. They were both completely naked. It became apparent that they had decided not to rush into a quickie. From my spot by the door, and given the position of our bed, I was mostly behind them, but at an adequate angle to see their silhouettes. Jack used Kelly kneeling on her knees with her face on the bed and biting the comforter, screaming through it. I doubt she would have noticed me even if I was right in front of her. His lurching shook the walls. I could only imagine how loud he could scream. I'd seen enough. I turned around and retreated to the wall next to the doorway, out of sight. Not that I needed to be particularly stealthy. I was still furious, but oddly enough, seeing them with my own eyes brought me down to the ground a little. I wasn't going to attack. I needed to weigh my options. Somewhere from the depths of my psyche, my old self came to the surface again. Wait a minute. No good can come of this. You can't do anything without making things worse. Just go back and have lunch. Pretend you didn't see anything. But just as quickly as the new self sealed it, the old self backed off. Screw it! You've stayed out of it your whole life. Look where it's gotten you. You're a little fool with an unfaithful wife, no matter what you tell yourself. I started to think. I looked into the bedroom for a second. My gaze rested on the back of Jack's head. No doubt I was furious with my wife, but it was that bastard who started it all. Kelly had made the decision to cheat on me, but he'd been pushing for it ever since he'd seen her picture. He thought it was okay to put me down. That had to be answered in a way that would have him cursing his arrogance on his dying day. As enraged as I wasn't an idiot. If I challenged him, he would put me in a coma, and my beloved would probably laugh and crack nuts while watching. Then she would have told the cops that I was the one who attacked him. Even if I had hit him, I would have gotten sick quickly. Maybe if I had a weapon, a baseball bat, or maybe I had a crowbar in my garage. A good slap might have done the trick. But it was possible he'd recover quickly. How hard could I hit him? They don't call him the Mountain for nothing. Maybe I could hit him in the head. But what if I kill him? I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about killing at that moment, and didn't care about the consequences. But I knew I didn't want Jack Knowles to die that day. I wanted him to regret his decision to mess with me for a long time to come. In that moment, I had an epiphany. It wasn't just about me. It was about him. Jack Knowles had a large balance on his karmic credit card. He'd lived the good life and shit on others. But today is the day of reckoning. And today he would face the consequences, and he would regret it. I now felt that my revenge was not only justified, but that I was an instrument of justice. I was to balance the cosmic scales on Jack's ass. So what could I do? I was outnumbered. What do you do when you're physically outnumbered? Then you have to outsmart your nemesis. That's good. He's the kind of guy who can always find work as a fence post if the receiving and delivery don't pay off. But what good does that do me? He's making love to my wife. What am I supposed to do? Come over and give him a math problem? No, no, no. I couldn't fight him, and my wits wouldn't be useful right now. No, for that I'd have to drive my enemy insane. All my life I've been maneuvering. My wife and Jack took advantage of that to meet behind my back. It was time for a sharp turn. You may wonder how long I pondered this under the noise made by the man I hated more than anything else in the world using the former love of my life on my own bed. Truth be told, my neurons were working so fast that these myriad thoughts raced through my head in nanoseconds. It takes longer to read, much less write that thought than it does to think it. I quietly made my way downstairs. Not that I needed to be very quiet, but I wanted to guarantee they wouldn't notice. I snuck into the garage. In the cabinet above the small built-in workbench, I pulled out my trusty nearly full can of WD-40. Then went back inside, walked over to the decorative fireplace where Kelly kept her scented candles, and grabbed the lighter she kept there. Finishing my preparations, I snuck back into the bedroom. As I crept up behind him, Lady Luck was finally on my side. I noticed that Jack had the look of a natural macho man. He was a pretty hairy guy and obviously didn't believe in any kind of grooming. That was only better for me. As I was about to take aim, his grunts got louder and more furious. "Ah, baby. You better get ready." "Perfect," I grinned. "There is a God, and he's putting my enemy in my hands. Not only was I going to ruin Mr. Knowles' day, and in fact his entire life, I was going to keep him from finishing in the process, and after today, the only reward he'd get would have to either pay for it or find a woman with a really specific fetish." Although Jack was probably thinking about the possibility of me catching them one day, maybe even looking forward to it, he didn't seem to allow even the thought of me overpowering him. I imagine he imagined like I would cry or scream in shock. Maybe pounce on him and give him the opportunity to beat the shit out of me and continue sleeping with my wife on top of my unconscious body. So there's no doubt that the hissing behind him, followed by the oily feeling across his back and the sudden pungent aroma of every man's favorite lubricant outside the bedroom, was so foreign to him in that moment that his brain couldn't even register it for a long second. Plus, he was on the verge of exploding. What just about all he could mutter, twisting in place too late to keep the oil from coating his hairy back while continuing to be just as hairy in the front. He reflexively closed his eyes as the fine mist hit his face as well, which worked, but not before he saw me. Damn bonus, he's not courting even there. I hope he had enough presence of mind at that moment to realize what was about to happen to him. Maybe even enough time to not take it seriously. I mean, no one could be that crazy, right? I flicked the wheel of the lighter and held it up to the cone of spray. The effect was so unexpected that it even surprised me a little. The fog turned from a reliable lubricant into a jet of flame. A second later, the Mountain could have changed his nickname to the Torch Man. A second after that, the screaming began. I have no idea if Jack was an experienced boxer, but the wild swing was easy to dodge. Admittedly, his first priority was probably to knock the can out of my hand. After that, he took a couple clumsy steps toward me, swinging both arms. Only his size worked against him as I dodged his blow. We now switched places in the bedroom, and I resumed my reprisal. I quickly spotted Kelly, mainly to make sure she wasn't interfering. She scrambled to the edge of the bed and curled up in a ball, eyes wide with shock and horror. Her primitive instinct for lust faded, as it was replaced by an even more primitive instinct to get away from the fire. I couldn't escape the thought that some illusion in her mind about how hypothetically this confrontation might have developed was crumbling as the new reality took over, and she was having trouble accepting what she was seeing. Jack was in a panic. He was moving aimlessly toward our dresser, screaming incoherently and waving his arms. I had a fleeting thought that the room might catch fire, but there was nothing flammable in his immediate vicinity as long as he kept moving. I also didn't care. It was amusing to watch the flaming figure lose his composure. Obviously, I wasn't thinking straight. I mean, I had just discovered my wife in bed with another man. But he really wasn't thinking straight. After all, he was on fucking fire. At that moment, a thought struck me. If this was a movie or something, the main character would have a witty line at the ready. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt the need to say something. "Hey, Jackie, light it up!" Okay, I wish I could have come up with something better, but it was in the moment. The main thing was that I wanted my words to be burned into his memory forever. Heh, heh. Burned into his memory. Finally, some part of his gray matter kicked in and he fell to the floor and started rolling around. This is an important safety tip. If you ever catch fire, stop, drop, and roll. However, it should be noted that stop, drop, and roll will not work if you are intentionally set on fire by the man you were using because you are a complete asshole and that man is standing right above you and keeps pouring fire on you. Right after that, I finally stopped because I noticed the carpet was going up in flames. His rolling would have stopped it, but not if I kept giving him a premature Viking funeral. The flames gave way to smoke and an acrid odor filled the air. His agonizing cries faded into pitiful moans of agony. I realized someone was laughing maniacally, and then I realized it was me. And I stopped. Standing there, I was no longer angry. I didn't feel rage or the pain of betrayal. All I felt in that moment was jubilation, the triumph of victory over the enemy. In that moment, I understood the caveman as he crushed the skull of his rival from the neighboring cave, or the Ronin samurai as he felt his blade thrust into the fiend who had killed his sensei. I took a quick look around my bedroom, confident that there would be no house fire, then cast one last glance at Kelly. She went pale under my gaze, terrified that she was next. But I wasn't going to hurt her. As I turned to leave, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse in her eyes, as if the scales of the last few weeks had fallen off her. Oh well, it was too late now. As I walked to the front door, the smoke alarm went off. I stood on the steps and carelessly tossed the WD-40 and lighter into the yard before taking a seat. Before the door, a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions swept over me. Admittedly, I felt fear and uncertainty about my future, but I didn't have an ounce of regret. I pulled out my phone and clicked on Facebook for some reason. I hardly ever use it, and I'm not one to be inundated with friends and notifications. The only reason was because I knew it would be publicized and I felt the need to speak up. I switched the status of the post from friends only to public and started typing. When people find out about what just happened, I want them to know that I'm not going to make excuses or meander pathetically. Suffice it to say, the guy in question thought exactly that. He thought he was hot shit. Turns out he was right. So there you have it. I hit share and tossed my phone on the can. I sat and waited. It had been a good day. It seemed like too much time had passed before I heard sirens in the distance. How long did it take my wife to recover after her lover came out of the oven? It turned out that I had a lot of sitting and waiting to do in the near future. I offered no resistance to the police and uttered no words other than brief affirmations that I was complying while I was being detained and processed. I remained silent during the interrogation. I knew I didn't have to speak, and I didn't see any point in it. There was no doubt about what had happened. I made no attempt to find a lawyer, so imagine my surprise when one showed up in the interrogation room a few days later. I explained to the guy, whose suit looked like it cost more than my car, that I hadn't asked for a lawyer, and even if I had, I couldn't afford one. Kelly had probably already emptied our bank account, and I knew I was facing a civil suit. He then informed me that I wouldn't have to pay. His firm was offering its services in exchange for its share of the lawsuit I was about to file. What? I'm filing a lawsuit? That's news to me. Of course, the incident at my house would have been publicized, at least at my job, but I underestimated how sensational it would be. Add to that my silent but vague statement on Facebook, and it went viral. I was getting my 15 minutes of fame while sitting in a jail cell, cut off from the world and unaware of anything. Everyone at my work seemed to love Jack Knowles, but as it turned out, not as much as they loved the juicy gossip. The rumors spread like fire through Jack's body. That led to the arrival of several reporters, not from the Times or anything like that, but the locals were following the juicy story. Undoubtedly aroused by the attention, the people who had kissed Knowles' ass now threw him under the bus. To be fair, they probably portrayed things in a worse light than I'd actually experienced. But I didn't care. Before the company could do anything about it, there were high-profile stories of a hostile work environment that fostered an atmosphere of harassment and abuse. The public perceived me as a long-suffering victim, and the company seemed to approve of it all. And it was only a matter of time before I snapped. My lawyer and his firm were not altruistic. They were sharks who smelled blood. Truth be told, I wouldn't have a real case. But this guy was a professional. He had a big firm behind him, and my company was up to its waist in bad publicity. The lawyer was confident that a settlement worthy of his time could be, without too much trouble. In exchange for my cooperation, they would handle my lawsuit as well as my case. I thought it was pretty simple. It was probably the easiest case the police had ever had. However, my new lawyer friend gave me reasonable assurances that he had the ability to soften my landing considerably. I had a clean record and a very sympathetic, very public set of mitigating circumstances. The only thing I asked him for in return was to assign someone to handle my divorce. Just get me out of it. I was headed to prison, and fighting for anything seemed pointless. He asked if I wanted to prepare a file for divorce. That caught me off guard. It had been 2 weeks. I hadn't thought about bail. I just figured Kelly had already filed for divorce and was expecting the papers to arrive any day now. But the lawyer said that as far as he knew, she hadn't. That's weird. I ended up being sentenced to 7 years, with the possibility of parole in 5. I have no idea what the final settlement amount was with my now former employer. The law firm that took my case probably didn't want me to know how much their lion's share was. I can't retire with my share, but I will have a fresh start when I breathe the air of freedom again. Yes, I had a mild annoyance when Jack sued me, but I was far from rich. You can't get blood from a turnip. He couldn't buy yachts with my money. There probably isn't enough money in the world to fix how ugly he's gotten. He'd burn everything he got from me in a month if he bought broads with the money they'd take to sleep with him. Besides, I was a prisoner. I couldn't do anything with my money anyway, since the settlement was in another pool that was closed, so it was Kelly who took the hit. Now he wasn't such a stud anymore, was he? No, she had destroyed her marriage and her lifestyle for someone who was now basically a very expensive gigolo. That was another reason I found it odd that she never filed for divorce, although since we were still married at the time of the incident, I don't think she would have been able to protect her assets from him that way. No matter. It was all behind big walls from me. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a divorced man. I've been here for a year at this point. I haven't seen her or heard from her or tried to contact her. I suppose one day I will have to deal with her, but probably not. 5 to 7 is a long time. I occupied my time with reading and weightlifting. There was nothing else to do, and besides, I couldn't, after I got out of prison, set people on fire who would cross me. I was never going to make it big, but I was damn sure I was going to make the most of what I had. Maybe I should get 1 or 2 prison tattoos. If Kelly ever saw me again, she'd shit bricks. One last little twist, and I got a letter from a random single woman. I've heard about these weird women getting into pen pal relationships with prisoners. This shit is real, and my story in particular made me a target for ladies who wanted to soothe my broken heart one day. I'd gotten more than one promise of eternal love and fidelity from women I'd never met. I wasn't going to believe anyone, it was too weird. But it amused me. So here's my story. I don't think anyone was satisfied except my lawyer, but I believe I handled this shitty situation as best I could. I'm at peace with my life. My prison sentence is coming to an end. Jack's prison, on the other hand, is his own sorry hide that he will be in for the rest of his life. The only thing left is that I still owe myself a steak. And the end!